Ariel, where are you? We'll get started, so welcome to the second day of summaries. What's up? Yeah, of course. Same format as yesterday. It's going to only be this, though, so we'll probably end pretty early so you guys can get freshened up and ready for the dinner. Same thing, please introduce yourselves and the workshop you led, and 5 to 8 minutes of commentary. And you guys can be a little longer if you want, since we have so much time. So, just because you're here. Sorry.
Okay, hi, I'm Ariel Gabizon. I did a workshop about explaining ZK snarks, which was a lecture about explaining ZK snarks. I don't know I can't say I was pretty surprised at how much stamina and the people had. Everybody stayed for the whole 2 hours, or a lot of people. We really got through a lot of stuff, elliptic curves and all these nuances of crypto assumptions. And yeah, I don't have much to comment about it except repeating the lecture, which I won't do now. So I'll just pass the mic.
Okay, I'm Mark Miller of Agoric. Dean Tribble, sitting next to me, and I co-led a workshop on security and smart contracts, which Dean will summarize.
So there were 2 phases of it, and I even brought a prop. Wait, here. I have a prop. You are here. You are here. So smart contract, yeah, you'll point, okay. So at the bottom we have the consensus layer, solo machines, right? Smart contracts were invented back in 1989, 1990. So smart contracts only ran on solo machines. You have permissioned blockchains, and you have public blockchains. And so there's a layer of consensus. Above that, we have what we call the adversarial execution layer. So one of the things we talked about was key security properties that at that execution layer affect what you're able to build up to. And where we're building to is up the next layer. We talked about contracts, so we went through a bunch of use cases in various different categories like sharing applications, access to justice, crossing international borders, supply chain, etc. And people identified a bunch of use cases that were interesting to them, and we cross-fertilized and looked at how could they talk to each other. But part of the particulars we wanted out of the adversarial execution layer is the ability to compose the smart contracts that were built at the next layer up to enable a much larger economy. So the second half of the workshop was going through in a future economy with pervasive smart contracts for everything you might do in a wonderful science fiction world, not a dystopian one. What would a day in the life of various people be? And so we went through 3 scenarios that came out of the use case selection we did in the first part. One of the scenarios was a traveling consultant. In this case, it was a nurse, Nurse Tom, that was looking up a gig for the day and going through to deliver medicines and then scheduling entertainment in the evening. The second one started as Airbnb replacement, which now on here is called Air Z and Z, for what would the architecture of that business be like if it was completely decentralized. And then the final one was from the perspective of a farmer and farming production, Rosa the farmer in South America producing coffee, and what's the whole ecosystem that takes that out and assures quality and delivers it where Rosa gets the best reward that we could possibly find. And so these will all be written up, the use cases will be written up, but we went through all three of those and looking at the counterparties and the contracts and the composition of services that you could use in that future economy that we would like to see happen and make happen. Oh, and I'm Dean Tribble.
Thanks, Dean. My name is Justin Smith. I gave the talk earlier on the X Wallet project. And so for the two sessions, it was a session A and a session B. I had originally planned quite a structured discussion, but it really did not go in that direction at all. We really went over time, and it had no form. But it was really interesting. We had a great conversation. The first portion, we had essentially a Q&A about the X Wallet project. We discussed questions that surround some of the privacy implications and the security implications of developing a cryptocurrency, a smartphone cryptocurrency wallet. So I want to distinguish between a smartphone cryptocurrency wallet, where we know that we're making privacy trade-offs because this is a general computing device, and smartphones are, in general, privacy loopholes and security loopholes. They involve a lot of trust. So we had some really good ideas that came out of that discussion, though, in terms of usability, user interface, and how we can improve those things in the near future. We talked a little bit about how we do things in Monero versus how we do things in Zcash, or how we could potentially do things in Zcash. There is, the overlap is really, really almost perfect between these two technologies. The one place that Zcash was really missing was the memory requirements, but now that those are coming down, it really does make a mobile experience possible. So then in actually near the end of the first session, I wanted to introduce this thing I came up with. I call it the cryptocurrency wallet scorecard. So I think there are a lot of wallets floating around out there. You guys probably know a lot of them by name. There's multi-currency wallets and so on. And so, what this scorecard is supposed to do is it's supposed to help you think critically about the software that's already out there, and helps you to collect some evidence to support your gut feeling about these things. What is really going on at a deep level with this software? What is the developer's intention? How can you even begin to trust this stuff? So the reality is that during our workshop, we didn't even really go into the cryptocurrency wallet scorecard at all, but I just wanted to put it out there. And then in the second portion of the session B of the workshop, actually the discussion moved more towards how we can grow the ecosystem, like cryptocurrency ecosystems in general. So how would we go about being very effective in expanding usage and adoption of cryptocurrencies? And so we talked about how you could approach an industry with a rather shallow supply chain. You could approach something like Uber, where these guys are already sort of, in a lot of cases, in a legal gray area. They're willing to take some risks. They're willing to take some chances. And it could potentially be a gray market service anyway, right? So moving completely out, we didn't even discuss black market activities. This is sort of out of band, but gray market activities. And so you could even consider that something like Uber or Airbnb could potentially be a gray market activity, where you don't necessarily want this showing up on your credit card statement, and you don't necessarily want even the service provider to know the source of the funds. And that's especially gnarly when it comes down to things like Bitcoin, right? So we want to be proactive in encouraging adoption of cryptocurrencies that are resistant to things like blockchain analysis. That's pretty much it.
Hey, my name's Isis, and I led a workshop on network privacy in blockchains. And so I had this idea that we were all going to split up, and everyone had already done their homework, of course. And everyone's going to split up and talk about all the things that they had already read, which was not really the case. But I did have a collection of papers, and people started to go through ideas and proposals that they had heard for adding in better privacy to various blockchain protocols. And some people went through some of the papers in the repo and also summarized things, and we wrote things on notes and then tried to group them by similarity of ideas. And then people were given little stickers where they're able to vote on what they thought was the most important topics to talk about. And then we went through those according to whichever had the most sparkly stickers on them. Some of the ones we talked about were Dandelion, and Dandelion++, which is a proposal for when you're doing like the broadcast protocol where you advertise a transaction to the network. You first start off in stem mode, and then you do onion encryption, and you go through 3 hops. And then after that, you go into fluff mode, where you do the general flooding mechanism that Bitcoin already does. We got pretty off topic at several points, talking about like application layer privacy and things like Mimblewimble and the Whisper protocol. We also talked about noise protocol at the network layer and whether or not it would be a good idea to use Tor. We talked about Kovri, which is a network built upon I2P and is supposed to be blockchain agnostic, and I guess several blockchains right now are looking at using that for added privacy. And we also talked about mixed nets extensively, which once you start a group of people talking about mixed nets, it tends to just be like every mixed net ever and talking about all the properties of all of them and comparing and contrasting. So we also went a bit off topic there, but it was good. There was a lot of good discussion and a lot of ideas for research moving forward, including studying path selection in these networks. So like how a client would choose which Bitcoin nodes it's going to encrypt its transactions to, and as well as how you would advertise all of the nodes somehow to a client. And yeah, that's.
Hi, I'm Eran Tromer, and together with Daniel Benaroshi, we led the double feature ZK Proof session, along with core speakers Sean Bow, Andrew Miller, Mutu, and Nicolas Greco. And we have set out to explore the following. So as you may remember, 30 years ago, zero-knowledge proofs were invented. And for most of that time, they were something that academic cryptographers were giddy about, but few others were aware of. And I think that Zcon 0 demonstrates that this has changed, that the potential of zero-knowledge proofs and the emerging implementations of this cryptographic primitive, as we call it, as a building block for higher-level functionality have been recognized and are now changing people's lives, bringing them to Canada for one. And along with this shared giddiness, we have some challenges facing us on how to convey the properties of these zero-knowledge proofs and how to standardize their usage and how to make sure that they are used in correct and secure ways. The ZK proof standardization effort is an effort led by consortium of academic and industry people who got together to face this problem and initiated a workshop at Cambridge, Massachusetts in May. And we got together, we created some joint understanding of the challenges ahead, and we are producing documents that summarize it. The aim of this effort, of the workshop, and of the follow-up workshop that we have today was, on one hand, to help practitioners understand this technology and how to use it correctly and how to convince their customers that they are using it correctly and to create new applications and to pick the best tools for the job. And conversely, to help the developers of the underlying zero-knowledge proof machinery to understand what challenges and needs the practitioners have and make sure that they answer these, whether by more effective communication or by creation of new and better schemes and novel research supporting these. The zero-knowledge standardization efforts, as reflected by the workshop in May and today, is split across 3 tracks: security, implementation, and applications. The security track aims to create and convey a shared understanding of what zero-knowledge proofs are about. How do we define their properties in a way that is easy to reason about? What assumptions and constructions enable their creation? What efficiency properties they have in principle? And how should we decompose these constructions into their building blocks and build them again in better and improved ways? There are many concrete suggestions that were made, new terminology and notations and table systematizing a lot of the knowledge that until now has been spread over dozens of academic papers. The next track, the implementation track, deals with the real-world code that implements those schemes. And by now we have many libraries and other pieces of code out there that are useful for creation of snarks. Both backends that implement the low-level cryptographic functionality, such as what Ariel was describing, and front ends that compile to the low-level representation from high-level representations that practitioners are going to use, and along the way realizes the optimizations that Dara was describing. And there are many questions there, like how do we enable interoperability so you can mix and match between these? You can take the specification of a constraint system produced by one implementation and plug it into the other, mix and match to get the best performance, and along the way reason about the security of what you do. How do you handle trust issues such as correctness of the code and the requisite parameter generation? So we touched on these mainly in the May workshop and in the upcoming documents related to it, and also surveyed today. The most exciting thing, perhaps, for the people here who are building such systems is the applications track that Daniel will talk about.
Thanks, Eran. So just to reiterate for a second, the first part of the two-part session was to kind of overview these documents that we have that are in progress to being written by the participants of the first workshop. And today you can actually go to zkproof.org and you can find there the applications document, which is like a first draft, very rough draft. And the other documents will be published in the coming weeks. So just to kind of take this back to the application specifically, the applications track, we discussed today in this workshop a bit the overview, and the main idea in some sense is that we're trying to kind of study or come up with a way to help practitioners and protocol designers to kind of build these applications without having to deal with all the different difficulties that come with designing and ensuring the security of these protocols. So one approach that we thought is interesting is kind of this modular approach where we come up with, and we have in the document a list of kind of basic gadgets, quote unquote, which can be thought of like low-level applications, and this can be kind of, computing the path of a Merkle tree in zero knowledge, or computing the pre-image of a commitment, these kind of things, such that these, in some sense, can be put just together and form the predicate of what can be the actual application of the zero knowledge. So of course, these can come with a lot of security caveats, and this is one of the main focuses of the applications track, together with the other tracks, to kind of make sure that the security is not left behind and is being considered. And this can be thought of in many different ways, if it's within a kind of a universal composable framework, maybe in an ideal setting or not. But in other ways are just to kind of think of the different caveats, but of course this is an exhaustive process. In the document, we actually present 3 different applications, one of which is asset transfer for blockchain applications. Another one is kind of like a credential aggregation of credentials in an identity setting. And another one is kind of regulation compliance based on kind of a supply chain idea. And we also present this list of gadgets that I mentioned at the beginning. So some interesting thoughts that came out of the talk today were kind of how to get involved the community in this respect, and it's kind of by submitting different kinds of applications and coming up with a larger set of library that we can have. And also there was the question of, is there a way to kind of have a formal verification of a circuit, or of just in general like a protocol, a zero knowledge protocol. So yeah, that's it. Sorry. No, that's it.
Okay, my name's Dara Hopwood, and I did a session on circuit optimization, so Zk Snark circuits, mainly focusing on R1CS, rank 1 constraint systems, which are the kind of circuits used by Zcash and many other systems. It was basically a brain dump of what I know and what I've learnt about circuit optimization for sapling. So I went through the syntax of zero knowledge proofs, what they give you, the importance of using precise types, of choosing a field that is efficient for for the protocol that you want to use, a little bit about field arithmetic, how the factors affecting performance, so what influences how costly proving is, how costly verification is, and then I started to go on to techniques for optimization, the fact that performance trade-offs inside a circuit are often very different from outside, so you need to reevaluate those trade-offs in the cryptographic protocols that you're using, and you may choose different primitives. You may choose algebraic primitives for inside circuits, where outside you would normally use a bit twiddling primitives like hashes and ciphers. And went through some examples, the importance of proof in supporting optimizations. So I'm a big fan of proving things that are non-obvious in what you're doing, even if only to satisfy yourself that you're not making silly mistakes. But you've also got to satisfy reviewers. I'm not going to go through everything I talked about, but there was quite a lot of engagement, and people seemed to be understanding and asking pertinent questions. So I was very pleased with how the session went.
Okay, well, Q&A Q&A, and actually we'll let Dean and Mark start since you guys have people who would like to speak.
Elena, could you
A mic's coming, I promise.
Hello. So during our session, we actually had a bunch of use cases we talked about, one of which was how do you set up Airbnb to be in a decentralized environment. And so we proposed, came up with a set of problems, actually, less so solutions. So in an Airbnb environment, you would have the guest and the host, and you have the network. And so there's mutual trust between the guest and the host, and there's also mutual trust between the guest and the host and the network. So in the real life example, that would be Airbnb. And so one thing we identified is how you do dispute resolution. So for example, if you come into a house and something doesn't work out, or vice versa, someone comes into your house, in a decentralized environment, who do you call? And who do you ask for dispute resolution? Who do you complain to? And how do you set up reputation systems? So, but the bulk of our conversation was around that. So if you want to know more, come find me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate. I'm a community lead at Agoric, and we also had a group talking about smart contract use cases, and our use case was the supply chain, and we chose the coffee supply chain, so starting with a small farmer in, let's say, El Salvador, and then taking that and then going through a co-op who might do the sort of verification and certification of certain aspects, whether it's organic or whether it's has certain food safety aspects, and then going through to a broker or a roaster of the beans who might be buying that sort of thing. So thank you.
Oh, there, I have another mic. Is this on? There we go. So and then the third scenario that we went through was the traveling consultant. In this case, Nurse Tom wakes up and looks on a gig economy kind of available gigs for the day of what would he like to do for his, and he's a nurse, a practicing nurse. In this case, it was pick up some drugs, deliver them out to a village, and provide them to the villagers that have whatever maladies they had been previously diagnosed for. So when he arrives at the place to pick up drugs, he has to prove his accreditation, but he would like to do so without providing details to this particular service that's providing the medications. This service wants to be sure that he's allowed the drugs, that he's the right party, and that he will know what to do with them. That may be because he's participated in an education system that provided continuing certification or zero-knowledge certification that he can then prove, but it might be because he's the nurse for Dr. Jane at a local hospital. Dr. Jane is well respected and said, Tom will deliver the drugs, he's fine, and so it may be part of a third-party reputation service. But in any case, once the supplies are handed off to him, he then catches a jitney ride on a distributed rideshare system, takes it out to the village. He must then verify the patient identity, verifies that the patient still has the malady that the prescription is for, but would like to be doing that where the prescription is in a sealed box, so when he crossed the border, he could prove that he had rights to what was in the box without disclosing the contents, and prove it in a way that the Border Patrol that he was crossing into the area that had these villages would be satisfied. Okay, so then he pulls out and administers the drugs, and of course the tracking system would know a temperature and that humidity was preserved and that a dose was administered, and so that all ratchets back to the original supplier. The payments are provided to him, the payments are provided to the people who manufactured the drug, and so forth, and Nurse Tom heads back again across the border and returns for an evening of entertainment. At that point, pulls out a mobile app and says, I want dinner and a show. It uses a privacy protecting affiliation service to make sure that he's going to get a dinner that he likes, or rather that is liked by people who like things similar to him, without disclosing all of his personal details to all of the restaurants and all of the various suppliers in the chain. Gets a ride share, hires a limo. That, of course, that process for dinner and a show, hired a limo through a service that the owner of the limo was renting it to a driver, and so there's an entire smart contract between the driver and the service, and so forth. And that's the kind of, crossing several different transactions that we were heading towards that wrapped up a bunch of the security and composition properties that we had talked about earlier in our session. So that was the back thing I wanted to fill in.
I just wanted to say that I was using a set of notes, and I will tweet them with the Zcon0 hashtag in a few minutes.
Nathan?
Hello, yes. I think this is a question for Dara, but maybe Daniel or Aran would also like to comment. But I'm wondering, so there are people working on like higher level application languages that can compile down to constraint systems. And I guess I'm not sure if my question is clear, but what's the relationship between the kind of manual circuit optimization tricks you can do and optimizations that a compiler might be able to do? Is it a complete overlap, or is there some overlap, or are they completely distinct?
So it kind of depends on the approach that the language takes. For something like Socrates, I think that's concentrating on using primitives that have already been optimized. So the kind of things that I was talking about in my session, they would be done by the person who is doing that low-level optimization. But they would still have a big effect on the overall performance of an application using Socrates or whatever. You can also imagine, sort of maybe a couple of years down the line, because I'm not sure that this is practical quite yet, where compilers would apply some of the same heuristics that I'm talking about automatically. Just like optimizing compilers now, so apply heuristics to minimize the number of instructions or the latency, they would be doing similar kinds of optimizations for ZK snarks. And I think that's quite feasible in principle. But in the meantime, knowledge about how to optimize things at the R1CS level is useful both when choosing primitives to use in higher level protocols and when sort of looking at the design constraints on new proving systems.
I think that's accurate. You can draw the analogy to program optimization, and the answers would be use efficient libraries, use optimizing compilers, and then hand optimize what really matters. I think in the context of zero-knowledge proofs, however, there is another complexity that we are just learning to cope with, which is the extra degree of freedom of moving some of the computation into untrusted advice, that you can just compute as auxiliary helper information outside the predicate proven by the snark in zero knowledge, and then just check that efficiently. The simplest example is division. Doing a circuit for division is complex, takes many gates, whereas verifying division, if someone untrusted has given you the results, is very easy. You just do the multiplication. And these things today are mostly handcrafted in all of the well-optimized libraries. And finding automated ways to identify such opportunities is an interesting research problem.
Thank you. And Zcon is not just hardware provider for the mining chips. We sponsor a lot of developer group to find a new solution. So one thing we come out as a difficulty is like we realize that we talk about decentralization, but for the trading, it's kind of centralized trading. So I want to ask if there is any way to do a decentralized trading with like automatic matching buyer and seller. So this kind of, I just wonder if anybody have this kind of solution. Thank you.
So I think your question is, how do you approach truly decentralized trading, right? I think the XCAT label really fits here, right? The cross-chain atomic swap. And what that means for me is it's trustless trading at a distance, right? So you're doing a swap between two cryptocurrencies where there's no counterparty risk. So either the trade completely fails and you get your money back, or the trade executes exactly as you expected it to. So to do it properly is actually really difficult. So when you have Bitcoin or a fork of Bitcoin, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like the reference implementation of a proper XCAT for me is actually the one that the Zcash team has done. So that's the one that I always point people to. So here's sort of the pedestal that we put this technology on. I haven't found anybody that's done it better or has done it at all, actually. Now, that's relatively straightforward because you can do pay to script hash. So when you're doing Litecoin, Bitcoin, things of that nature, this is okay. But when it comes down to something like Monero, it's quite a bit more difficult, and you need to take a very different approach. And the whole problem with all of these things is you need to be quite patient, right? So the user experience is going to be very different from what you're used to when you go to like a Bitfinex or something and you send them money and then you just sort of automatically just have your order filled, right? So here it's going to be much more similar to like I would say the Bitcoin Lightning Network right now, like production, right? You're going to have issues where the node you connect to suddenly fails for some unexpected reason, and then you have to wait, 400 blocks before you get your money returned. And so, waiting 400 blocks to get your money back, that is tough for some people, And then there's another sort of layer to this, right? So that's the execution of the trade itself, which we can handle on kind of an atomic level. But then there's also this order book process that we have to handle too. And that's something that we haven't even begun to look at, I would say, or at least I don't know of anyone who has begun to look at it. But this interface, I think, can be handled at an application layer. So, at the wallet layer, I think wallet providers can implement order books and things like that. And so then you can still do it entirely peer-to-peer. You would be open to certain attacks, but it's unlikely, I would say, at that level. But it would take a lot more research. I would say we're still several years away from properly implemented XCAT. Other questions?
I actually have a question.
Oh, okay. Well, do you want to?
Thanks for your answer. You triggered me another question. Some people they send their BTC to LTC address and can never get the money back. So anybody have a solution like that?
The question is burning by going to the wrong address. I think your question is, or your statement was that people are burning BTC by sending it to an LTC address, or maybe sending their BTC to a Bitcoin Cash address. Yeah, it's a real problem, right? So transparency can help solve that. I think sort of having ethical standards in how you present what you're selling is important. I think a lot of this happens at the application level. You know, people need to really make it clear to people, to the user, what exactly they need to do, and you need to take away as much. You need to take away as much sort of variability as you possibly can from that experience. So, you know, just things like on the front end, you know, what we say is the front end. So if you're providing some kind of service, like a trading service, you really owe it to your users to do some kind of validation, right? Like try to help them through this process and take out the opportunity for failure. So, I mean, it's impossible to eliminate all of these failure cases, but there's still way too many today. And I think that really falls on the shoulders of wallet providers and exchanges and all these other actors in the ecosystem. It's important to make these things really, really explicit and then try to control as well.
I just had a question for Iran, or rather to expand on. You mentioned the new area where some of the function gets taken outside of the circuit and computed and then brought back in. Can you say anything about what's the privacy impact of that? Is that exposed differentially from the data that was computed in the circuit?
So information that's computed outside of the circuit per se and only verify the circuit would typically be provided to the circuit as part of the witness information that is protected by zero knowledge. And the way this is implemented in the popular libraries for creating such constraint systems is that this whole creation and verification are encapsulated within a gadget that makes it completely modular and hides this extra complexity and the risk of putting it in the wrong place from the application programmer.
That's one way of moving things out of the circuit, and it does retain privacy. There's another way, which is to change the higher level protocol so that you're not doing as many inefficient things in the circuit, and that really requires a cryptographer to analyze what you're doing and make sure that you're not losing privacy by doing that. But you can often do it successfully. So for example, in Sapling, we wanted hardware wallets to be able to authorize transactions without giving the spending key to the prover, so that the prover didn't have to be on the hardware wallet. And we found a way of doing that using re-randomizable signatures. And that's actually a general technique that can be applied to zero-knowledge proofs in any application.
Any more questions? Great. Well, we're really very much ahead of schedule. So the next thing on the agenda is our dinner and cocktail hour. The cocktail hour starts at 6. It's going to be in the same location as yesterday, followed by the dinner at 7. The dinner is fun. It's a community kind of like hurrah moment. We hope you guys come and be on time, since we have a program we're going to go through. And as I said before, it's not fancy. Feel free to come comfortable as you are, or if you really want to dress up, knock yourself out. Another thing, so for tomorrow, checkout is at noon in the hotel if you're staying here. We do have Centerville open downstairs, which will be attended, and you're welcome to leave your luggage there as early as 8 o'clock. Is that right? Yeah, anyways. Yeah, 8? Okay. Well, you can leave it at 8 until 5, yeah. So if you check out really early, go for it. And it's attended, so feel free to leave your luggage there. And then also tomorrow, the formal programming ends at 1:30 after lunch. But we do have freestyle workshops, which we hope you guys will stick around and attend and continue your conversations. They are, you can start there's a sheet out front to write down ideas that you'd either like to lead or see discussed. Please fill that out, and this is really about self-organizing, so you guys are rocking it so far, so keep it up. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about, so I've gotten a lot of questions about why did we choose Montreal for Zcon 0, so I'll give you just a quick story. Basically, in September when I started, we were talking about Zcon 0, I was giving these specificities somewhere on Earth in the future. So we looked at schedules of other major conferences where we know people that would like to come might be conflicted. June seemed like a good time of year. We wanted a place that was not terribly warm, so Montreal seemed perfect for June. But more importantly, Scaling Bitcoin was here in 2016, and that was a conference we really kind of looked at as seeing how we could set our agenda and how we wanted to move forward as it being a very focused conference with the right people in the right room. So we definitely took a lot of what they did, notably their freestyle workshops and conversations where people could go and chit-chat and continue on with these great ideas. We also didn't want sponsorships to keep it small and to also keep maybe some unsavory pitches out of the room. And we didn't want Lambos parked out front either, so that kind of helped. And we also, if you notice, we were basically in 3 spaces, so we wanted it to be a smaller event space so that you guys could, really chat with each other and continue the conversations face to face. Since we spend the rest of the year online, we really wanted you guys to have good FaceTime. And that being said, this is actually Paige Peterson's brainchild. She's not here, but when you get a chance at the dinner, thank her because she was the one who wanted to do this format, keep it small, keep it intimate. Her and Josh hand chose each speaker, and they also hand chose all of you. That's why we went through our kind of bureaucratic and annoying application process and then a registration process, because we really wanted to have a diverse yet proper audience for what we're going to discuss. So please thank Josh and thank Paige for thinking through all these really great details. And just so you know, tomorrow I will, or probably, let's be honest, Tuesday of next week, I'll send you guys an email following up, and I would like your feedback. I'd like to know what we can improve, what you'd like to see next year. And so please fill out the survey, and we'll also collect some data on you guys so we can see what the audience was like. I had self-reported data from before, but to see if you guys choose to self-identify in another way. And then we'd like to have a really great Zcon 1 next year. So please keep a lookout for that email. And thank you guys, and go ahead, Dara.
You got the... Thank you. So you did mention visas as a factor in choosing where to hold a conference, especially with the recent news about the Muslim ban in the States. I know that for me, definitely, if Zcon 0 had been in the States, I wouldn't have been able to go. And I know Canada is not completely ideal either, but it's an improvement on the States, and I think international conferences really should no longer be held in the United States.
It won't be. I can guarantee you Zcon 1 will not be in the US. Mainly for the visa issue. So I started researching countries that don't require visas. They're a little warm for June, so maybe not in some of these places. Oh, we have a lost and found bag as well. Anyways, see you guys at 6 tonight. Get dazzled up and ready for a fun dinner.